Now, here is the speech, crafted in the tone of reflective literary theology, as if written by an Oxford ink, pen from a soul soaked in wonder and reason. There comes a moment in every soul's story when joy vanishes, and not as a storm that passes, but like a name forgotten, something once known, now only remembered by ache. You do not know exactly when it left, but you remember when you knew it was gone, and in that hollow silence a terrible thought arises worse still, but then, then comes a whisper, ancient, not invented, gentle but unyielding. It does not argue or explain, it does not shout, it simply says, and this is why you must stay, not for sentiment or spectacle, but because if this is true, truly true, it is that we confuse joy with comfort, laughter, or relief. But joy is older than pleasure. It is the sudden ache you feel when something beautiful reminds you of something you've never seen yet somehow know. Joy is the pull toward the infinite through the finite. It is not satisfaction, but yearning that tastes like hope. When joy is absent, we think we are cursed, but in truth we are being awakened, shaken out of the narcotic of triviality. A soul that feels no pain may already be too numb to hear the music of the divine. There is no path to restored joy that avoids the dry places. Yet even there you are not alone. The silence is not absence, it is preparation. Joy often dies in order to rise again, not as it was, but as it was meant to be. When God speaks of restoring joy, he does not mean returning what was. He means transforming the ruin into a cathedral. The broken vessel will not be glued together, it will be melted and remade in fire. When God says, "I will restore your joy," he speaks not as a friend giving advice, but as a king declaring decree. The stars obey him, the oceans listen, and so will your sorrow. This is not wishful thinking. It is the structure of eternity. We often chase the feeling of joy the way a man might chase his shadow. But joy is not a reward, it is a byproduct. You do not find joy by pursuing it. You find it by turning your face toward the sun and discovering that your shadow has fallen behind you. God does not say, "I will give you joy because you are worthy." He says, "I will give you joy because I am." The problem is not that we've lost joy, it's that we've lost sight. Like a blind man blaming the sun for the darkness, we often think joy has gone when our eyes have simply dimmed. To restore your joy, God does not merely give you back a feeling, he recalibrates your heart. What once looked like ashes now glows with embers. What once seemed ordinary now sings, "Yes, we grieve, yes, we fall." But heaven is not silent, and joy, true joy, is not a flicker. It is a dawn. And here is the most mysterious thing. Those who have tasted the deepest sorrow often drink the richest joy. Why? Because joy is not the absence of grief. It is the presence of God in the middle of it. So, to the one who feels hollow, brittle, undone, to the one who no longer remembers the sound of joy, hear this, and hold it like a candle in the wind. He is not asking you to go back. He is inviting you to go forward to the place where the music you barely remember plays again, louder, deeper, forever. Because he has said it, and he does not lie. We have confused the words, you and I. Joy and happiness, emotion and essence. We've let the world teach us that joy is simply the high note of a pleasant song, the warmth of sunlight on an easy day, the laugh that escapes over a cup of coffee, the thrill of a new thing, the comfort of safety. But true joy is something altogether different. It does not sparkle, it burns. It is not shallow like a smile, it is vast, like a longing too large for this world. It is the ache of remembering something you have never seen and somehow still miss. Joy is not the absence of sorrow. In fact, it often speaks loudest in the company of sorrow. It is not the result of ease, nor the product of circumstances falling in place. It does not depend on wealth or health, nor does it wilt in the presence of grief. Joy is older than happiness. It was not born with laughter, and it does not die with tears. It existed before we were made, and it is stitched into the very soul of creation, the kind of music that the stars might hum and the angels never forget. This is why joy, when it touches us, feels both electric and elusive. You cannot hold it, you cannot summon it like a mood. It arrives often uninvited in a line of poetry, a shaft of golden light across the floor, the scent of an old book, the silent moment after prayer. It stirs you for no clear reason, and in that stirring you are both delighted and disoriented. You smile and ache at the same time, for in that moment you remember or almost remember something. A home you have not yet reached, a language you once knew, a face you have not yet seen. This is why joy is not pleasure, though it may carry pleasure with it. Pleasure fades quickly, and it is satisfied by repetition. You eat the cake again, you hear the joke again, you repeat the experience. But joy refuses to be repeated. The moment it is imitated, it evaporates. It is not satisfied by repetition because it is not of this world. It is a signpost, not a destination. It is a glimpse, not a possession. This is also why the loss of joy feels like more than sadness. It feels like exile, not the pain of being hurt, but the deeper sorrow of being distant from something you can't name. The most dangerous mistake we make is to think that joy is simply missing because we are broken, that the silence of joy is proof that God has gone quiet. But perhaps the silence is not abandonment, but invitation. Perhaps the aching emptiness is not a sign of joy's death, but of its eternal nature. We are haunted by joy, not because it betrays us, but because it refuses to stay in a world not big enough to hold it. Joy is, in its truest form, homesickness for heaven. It is not nostalgia. It is not sentiment. It is not wishing for better times. It is the soul's memory of a truth it has not yet seen the echo of a voice it longs to hear again. It is the whisper in the heart that says, "You were made for more." And this is precisely what makes God's promise so astounding. "I will restore your joy." He does not say he will merely lift your spirits or ease your burdens. He does not offer temporary cheer or quick relief. He offers something far older and far more precious. The restoration of joy is not the returning of a mood, it is the reawakening of the soul's deepest memory. In a world that chases thrills and settles for distractions, this promise is radical, because true joy is not something we can create or buy or manipulate. It is something that must be restored not by our efforts, but by the one who wrote joy into the script of the universe in the first place. So when we say that joy is not happiness, we are not demeaning happiness. We are simply recognizing that happiness is a flicker, and joy is the flame. Happiness is the echo, and joy is the original sound. It is not a feeling, it is not even fully of this world. It is the breath of heaven, the song of Eden, the sound of eternity resonating in a fragile heart. And when God says, "I will restore your joy," he is not offering escape, he is offering home. We are tempted to believe that joy, once lost, is gone because God has left us, that when our hearts go quiet, it is because heaven has shut its gates. We associate joy with divine presence and sorrow with divine silence. And yet, the deeper truth is often precisely the opposite. The loss of joy is not the abandonment of God, it may in fact be the arrival of his deeper work. When joy slips through our fingers, it is not always because we have fallen from grace. It may be because we are being awakened to it. When we begin to grow in soul, joy does not always grow louder, sometimes it grows more distant, more subtle, more elusive. Not because it is no longer there, but because we are being stretched to seek more than comfort. The human soul is not a machine that thrives on predictability. It is a mystery fashioned by hands that shaped galaxies. It is meant to thirst not because the water has dried up, but because the thirst teaches us to look beyond the well. You see, a child's joy comes easily, quickly, and often, but it is not yet tested, it is not yet deep, it is not yet forged in fire. The joy that comes with maturity is rarer, and therefore more precious. It does not dance at every convenience, nor sing at every success. It appears when we have endured. It emerges from the ashes of former selves. It arrives not like a shout, but like a whisper that has waited for your ears to grow quiet enough to hear it. To lose joy, then, is not always to be forsaken. Sometimes it is to be invited further in. It is as if God has hidden himself, not to punish, but to draw us closer. Like a lover who steps out of view, not to retreat, but to compel the beloved to follow, not so that we may prove our affection, but so that we may discover how deep it truly runs. In this light, the loss of joy becomes sacred. A divine discontent, a holy hunger, not the end of something beautiful, but the beginning of something eternal. There are seasons when God removes the sweetness, and we are left with only trust. And trust, though it does not glitter like joy, glows with a quieter flame. It is in those moments of silence, of dryness, that we learn whether we truly sought God or only his gifts. And here is the great paradox. It is often in the moments where joy seems most absent that our souls are being most deeply reshaped. Consider this. We rarely ask deep questions in moments of delight. When joy is easy and flowing, we rarely pause to ask why we exist or what eternity means. But when joy is lost, truly lost, the questions awaken. Where is God? Who am I without joy? What remains when the song has ended? These are not signs of weakness, they are signs of life. The pain of losing joy is not the dullness of death, but the stretching of a soul being drawn toward its true source. There is something unspeakably powerful about this hidden process. For God does not waste sorrow, and he does not abandon his own. He may be silent, but he is not absent. He may be invisible, but he is never uninvolved. The garden may feel wintered, but the roots are alive. It is beneath the surface in the dark, unseen places that the transformation begins. We imagine that joy is meant to be constant, but perhaps we were never meant to cling to it as a possession. Joy is not a trophy, it is a signpost. It points beyond itself. It is a messenger, not the message. When it departs, it leaves a silence, and in that silence, if we are still and brave enough to listen, we begin to hear something older, stronger, deeper. So no, the loss of joy is not proof that God has turned his back. If anything, it may be the moment he has turned his face toward you with greatest intention. The heart that mourns the absence of joy is already alive with longing, and that longing is holy. It is not despair, it is the doorway. When your joy fades and the light seems gone, do not believe the lie that you have been abandoned. You are being called. You are being invited into the mystery. You are not being punished, you are being pursued. The loss of joy is not the end of the story. It is the turning of a page, and on the next page, written in the ink of eternity, are the words, "Behold, I am doing a new thing. I will restore your joy." We often speak of restoration as if it were the simple act of going back, as though the healing of a thing means returning it to its previous state, untouched by time or sorrow. But the way God restores is never a reversal. It is not nostalgia made real, it is not memory revived, it is not Eden replayed in quieter colors. No, divine restoration does not rewind, it remakes, and what is remade by his hand is not merely what was lost. It is something new, something deeper, something unimagined, something touched by fire and made more beautiful for having been broken. There is a reason the old things are not simply patched but transformed. A soul cannot be returned to innocence. for innocence once lost is gone forever. But what can emerge from loss is something greater than innocence, wisdom seasoned with mercy, vision forged through tears, joy refined in sorrow's furnace. The heart that has known exile is not the same as the heart that has never left home. And that is precisely the miracle. God does not bring you back unchanged, he brings you forward renewed. We misunderstand the word restore when we think it means replace. What God promises is not the same as what was, it is more. To long for the past is human, to resurrect it is impossible. What has died in us does not come back as it was, and it is not meant to. What God resurrects, he remakes. This is the mystery of grace, that the ruins are not swept away, but built upon. The cracks do not disappear, they become the setting for gold. Think of the potter who, seeing a shattered vessel, does not merely glue the pieces together to make it whole again. He grinds the fragments, mixes them with new clay, and shapes something that has never existed before, something with memory, something with history, something that carries the weight of breaking and the wonder of being held again. That is what God does with our joy. He does not return what was, he shapes what will be, with hands that remember your pain and still press beauty from it. There is something in this that almost feels unfair, the idea that what was lost cannot be retrieved. But this is where the promise surpasses the pain, because what God forms from the ashes is not a second-rate version of your former joy. It is more radiant, more real. It is not joy restored to the same shape, it is joy that has grown larger than the wound it came through. It is not shallow, not sweet for the sake of sweetness, but rich, textured, layered with meaning and echo and strength. You may have believed that to lose your joy was to lose a part of yourself forever, and in some sense that is true. You are not who you once were, but that is not a tragedy. That is the beginning of transformation. For God never asks us to return to who we were. He asks us to become who we are being remade to be. Restoration, then, is not a backward motion, but a forward calling. It is not the reigniting of old light, but the kindling of new fire. This is why the past, however cherished, cannot be the measure of our hope. God is not simply trying to replicate the happiest chapters of your life. He is writing new ones, and in them you may find a joy deeper than what you thought you'd lost. Not a copy, not a lesser thing, but a joy that has passed through the dark and come out with glory in its eyes. We often want things to be as they were. We pray for the old days to return, for the laughter to sound again as it did, for the heaviness to lift in the way it once did before. But God, in his wisdom, declines our request not because he is deaf, but because he is doing something far more profound. He is not giving you what you had, he is giving you what you were always meant to have. So when God says, I will restore your joy, do not expect replicas of old pleasures, expect recreation, expect something new born from the fire. Expect beauty with scars, music with memory, light with gravity. Expect joy that has been tested and triumphed, not as it was, but as it was always meant to be. This is the promise. This is the hope. Restoration is not the end of pain, it is pain transformed into wonder. We live in a world saturated with sentiment, soft words wrapped in warmth, phrases designed to comfort without demanding. They decorate greeting cards and fill the air of well-meaning conversations. So, when we hear a promise like, God will restore your joy, we are tempted to place it on the same shelf. We hear it as wishful thinking, a kind of spiritual lullaby meant to soothe rather than awaken. But this promise is not sentimental, it is not a hollow comfort or vague encouragement. It is strategy, it is the voice of eternity speaking into time, declaring not merely what might be, but what will be because God himself has willed it. There is a fundamental difference between human hope and divine promise. Human hope is fragile. Often reactive, we hope for what we cannot control. We long for what we may never see. But when God speaks of restoration, he does so not as a comforter who merely feels our sorrow, but as a sovereign who governs all things, even sorrow itself. His promise is not grounded in emotion. It is grounded in his nature. He does not offer joy as a possibility. He declares it as a certainty. This is why we must take such promises seriously, not as sentimental encouragements, but as glimpses into the blueprint of divine intent. God does not throw words into the wind. Every syllable of his speech is weighted with eternity. When he says, "I will restore," he is not expressing a desire. He is unfolding a plan that has been in motion before you lost your joy, before you even knew joy existed. To believe in this promise, then, is not to wish. It is to align yourself with the current of eternity, to lean into the stream already flowing in your direction. You are not striving to convince God to act. You are learning to trust that he already is. Your sorrow does not surprise him. Your numbness does not delay him. The empty spaces where joy once lived are not beyond his reach. They are the very places he intends to inhabit. If you listen closely to Scripture, you will notice that God never promises ease, but he does promise restoration. That distinction is crucial. He never promises that your joy will return on your terms or according to your timeline. But he promises something far more trustworthy, that joy is part of his redemptive design, that it will not be lost forever, that he has woven restoration into the fabric of your journey. It may arrive differently than you imagined. It may take root in soil you thought barren, but it will arrive. Even creation itself groans in longing not for comfort, but for restoration, and so do we. That ache in your chest when joy is missing, it is not a sign of your weakness. It is evidence that eternity has left its fingerprint on your soul, that you were made not only to survive the absence of joy, but to be remade by the promise of its return. The pain of joy's loss is not the end of the story. It is the space in which God begins to write something truer. And if you think this promise of restored joy is only for the devout or the unbroken, think again. God's promises are never reserved for the flawless. In fact, it is often the crushed and the weary to whom the greatest promises are whispered. You do not need to be joyful in order to qualify for restoration. You need only be empty enough to receive it. The promise is not a reward, it is an invitation. A reminder that joy is not something we manufacture, it is something we inherit when we trust the giver more than the gift. Let this truth reframe your sorrow. You are not forgotten. You are not merely enduring a hard season. You are walking through territory already marked by divine promise. You are not circling in futility. You are being led, gently but surely, toward a restoration crafted in heaven. The one who made you knows exactly what has been lost, and he has already planned how it will be restored. This is not sentiment. This is strategy. It is heaven's intentionality moving through the ruins of earth. It is not a comfort for the moment, it is a cornerstone for the future. To believe it is not to ignore your pain. It is to look at your pain and say, this is not the end. He has promised more, and his promises do not fail. So do not measure your future by your present lack. Lift your eyes higher. You are being carried toward joy, not the fragile, passing joy of momentary relief, but the enduring, unshakable joy that comes only from the hand of the Eternal. And he has said with clarity, with power, with the full force of heaven behind his word, I will restore your joy. When we speak of joy, we often speak of it as though it were delicate, a flickering candle, a feather caught in the wind, a brief warmth that appears when life aligns just right, when the days are kind, the nights are soft, and the heart has no questions. That kind of joy, the joy we often know in our earliest days, is beautiful, yes. But it is also breakable, and because it is breakable, we begin to protect it, guard it, even fear its loss more than we enjoy its presence. We hold it like a glass ornament, afraid to breathe too heavily lest it slip through our fingers. But the joy that God restores is nothing like that. It is not fragile. It does not rely on smooth circumstances or perfect outcomes. It is not a thing to be preserved, but a force that endures. It is joy that has been buried and risen, joy that has been burned and forged, joy that has met sorrow face to face and not been extinguished. What God restores is not the thin joy of ease, but the deep joy of resurrection. It is joy that has learned how to sing even in silence. The kind of joy we speak of here is not immune to sorrow. It has walked beside it. It has tasted bitterness and not been soured. It has wept and not been drowned, and that is what makes it strong. It is not the denial of pain, but the overcoming of it. Fragile joy shatters when the winds shift. Fortified joy stands even when the storm refuses to move. It does not hinge on the outcome, because it is anchored in the one who stands outside time and cannot be moved. You may have noticed this kind of joy in those who have suffered greatly and yet radiate peace. They are not pretending, they are not naive, they have simply learned what most of us forget. That joy is not a mood. It is not a reaction, it is a position of the soul, and it is most visible not in the absence of hardship, but in the presence of something greater than it. You see, restored joy carries the weight of history and the strength of survival. It is joy with memory, joy with scars, joy that remembers how it once was lost and marvels that it has returned stronger than ever. This is why God's restoration is not simply emotional recovery. It is spiritual reformation. He does not merely return us to the shallows where we once danced. He teaches us how to swim in the deep. The joy he gives does not falter when the skies darken. It shines through the dark. It is joy that knows God is good, even when the evidence is hidden. It is joy that has tasted grief and still declares, I trust him. This joy cannot be taken, not because life won't try, but because it no longer lives on the surface. It has rooted itself deeper beyond the reach of shifting events. The job may fail, the relationship may falter, the body may grow weak, and still this joy remains, because it no longer draws its breath from circumstance. It draws it from Christ, and that is what transforms it. You no longer need everything to be right in order to feel light. You no longer need approval or applause to feel loved. You no longer need constant reassurance to feel secure. Joy restored by God becomes the quiet presence that walks beside you, not loud, not showy, but always there. It is the kind of joy that you don't have to chase because it does not run. It abides, and what a difference this makes. You begin to live without fear of loss, because what you have cannot be taken. You begin to love without fear of rejection, because joy is no longer a reward but a reality. You begin to walk through valleys and still breathe hope, not because the valley is easy, but because you are no longer alone in it. Restored joy reminds you that the light is not gone, it has simply moved inside. So when God says, I will restore your joy, he is not speaking of shallow delight or temporary relief. He is offering you something eternal, something the world cannot give and therefore cannot take, something that has been tested in fire and proven unshakable. It is not the joy of a perfect day. It is the joy of a heart that knows whom it belongs to and rests in that knowledge, whatever may come. This is joy fortified, not the kind you hold gently, but the kind that holds you and will not let go. There is a quiet lie that slips into the soul during seasons of sorrow, the lie that we have lost joy because we failed to deserve it. We search the ruins of our happiness, looking for what we did wrong, what we forgot, what we lacked. We trace our pain backward like detectives, hoping to find the fault lying in ourselves that caused the collapse. And beneath all this searching is a silent conclusion. Joy, it seems, was something we had to earn, and we must have failed. But this is not how God works. This is not how joy lives, and it is not how love restores. The joy that God restores is not a paycheck for moral performance. It is not the prize at the end of good behavior. It is not the result of our strength, our wisdom, or even our devotion. If that were so, joy would be rare indeed, for who among us could claim to deserve such a gift? Who has walked so uprightly, thought so purely, or trusted so unwaveringly that God would owe them joy in return? The truth is, joy is not owed. It is given. It is not the fruit of our merit, but the overflow of his mercy. This is why the restoration of joy must be understood as an act of love, not a transaction. It comes not from a scale where our efforts are weighed and rewarded, but from a heart that beats with infinite compassion. God does not restore your joy because you have passed the test. He restores it because he sees your need, because he is moved by your tears, because he cannot look at your pain and remain unmoved. He is not a manager balancing ledgers. He is a father who longs to see his children smile again. And so the return of joy is never a matter of earning, it is a matter of grace, pure grace, that strange, unearthly thing that gives without measuring, that heals without explanation, that finds the broken and whispers, "Still, I choose to bless you." Grace does not wait until we are worthy. It enters the ash heap while we still weep, and begins to plant gardens there. This is important because if you believe that you must earn your joy, you will never stop working. You will become a servant in your own soul, trying to impress the Master who has already called you beloved. You will confuse healing with hustle. You will think God is holding out, waiting for you to finally get it right, but he is not. He is not waiting for you to reach a level of spiritual sophistication. He is waiting for you to rest in the truth that he gives because he loves, and love does not withhold. Even when joy has been lost through our own foolishness, our own rebellion, our own wandering, even then, the offer stands. He does not restore because we have made amends. He restores because his mercy runs deeper than our missteps. This is not to make light of sin or sorrow, both wound us deeply. But even deeper than the wound is the well of his kindness. There is no fall so far that his hand cannot reach. There is no ruin so complete that his breath cannot speak life again. If this sounds too generous, too free, it is. That is what makes it holy. The world gives based on effort, but God gives based on love. That is why joy restored by him carries such power. It breaks the cycle of striving. It silences the voice of shame. It teaches the soul that it is not loved for what it can produce, but simply because it exists and is known. The joy he gives does not carry the weight of pressure. It does not whisper, "Keep this up or you'll lose it again." It says, "You are mine, and I delight in seeing you whole." This kind of joy cannot be manipulated. It cannot be bought. It can only be received, and in receiving it, we begin to see ourselves differently, not as orphans clawing for scraps of happiness, but as sons and daughters seated at a feast prepared in love. The restoration of joy is the evidence that love has not given up, that God is still writing the story, that no matter how dark the chapter, the author remains faithful, and he writes not with ink, but with compassion. He writes not with rules, but with redemption. So if your joy is gone, and you wonder if it will ever return, remember this: it is not your job to be worthy of it. It is his joy to restore it, not because you have earned it, but because he is good, always, and in that goodness he delights not only to comfort you, but to make you joyful again, truly, deeply, lastingly so. That is love, and that is your promise. There is a common hope that when sorrow passes, life will return to how it was before, that we will reclaim who we used to be, with our old laughter, our lightness, our sense of certainty. We long for what we had, assuming that healing means reversal. But God, in His wisdom, rarely leads us backward. He is not interested in rewinding our lives, but in redeeming them. And when He restores joy, He does not simply reinstall what was lost. He recreates, renews, and reshapes us into something we had never been before. This is the paradox of divine restoration. It feels like a return, but it is, in truth, a transformation. We may begin by yearning for the old joy, the childlike gladness, the innocent trust, the ease of heart we once knew, but God offers something deeper. He does not give us our old selves back. He gives us a self that has been through the fire and come out forged. He gives us joy that knows sorrow, faith that has wrestled with doubt, peace that has walked through the storm and still held its breath. This new joy is not naive. It is not brittle. It does not live in denial of the pain we endured. In fact, it draws power from that pain. It becomes joy not in spite of suffering, but because of what suffering revealed, that we are not abandoned, that grace still flows, and that God has not finished with us. The joy restored to us by God has memory. It has context. It remembers the nights when we could not pray, the days when we felt numb, the weeks when we saw no end in sight, and that memory becomes part of its strength, because we know what it cost to smile again. You see, sorrow strips us. It tears away the easy answers and shallow comforts. It exposes our illusions and unravels our false securities. And yet, when joy returns, it clothes us with something far more enduring. A deeper awareness of grace, a fuller appreciation of the simple and sacred, a quiet confidence that though the world may shift, the one who held us in the darkness is still with us in the light. To be restored by God is to be changed. There is no true encounter with His mercy that leaves us untouched, and so the joy we receive after loss is not merely a replenishment, it is a resurrection. It is not the return of the same, but the birth of the new. That is what makes it holy. That is what makes it last. This new self born in pain but raised in promise is gentler, slower to judge, quicker to forgive. It understands weakness in others because it has known weakness in itself. It laughs not because life is easier, but because it knows how precious laughter is. It loves more deeply because it has seen how fragile we are. And it worships not from routine, but from a place of honest wonder, that God would take our ashes and make beauty, that He would take our mourning and shape it into joy. And so, when you think of restoration, do not imagine a return to your past. Do not reach back for who you were. That version of you was never meant to be permanent. God is not restoring your old life. He is forming a new one where joy has roots that reach through rock. One where your heart, though bruised, has become more open, not less. One where your faith, though tested, now burns with the quiet strength of one who has seen the valley and still believes in the mountain. This is why joy restored by God feels different. It is quieter at times, more settled, more certain. It does not clamor for attention. It does not depend on every detail falling into place. It rests because it has learned to trust, and in that trust it finds its glow. You are not returning to who you were. You are being made into someone wiser, softer, stronger. Someone who carries joy not like a fragile treasure, but like a fire lit from within, unextinguished by tears, undimmed by trials. A joy that is yours, not because life is flawless, but because God is faithful. So do not fear the change. Do not cling to the old self. Let restoration do its work. Let joy shape you anew. For what God gives back is not what was taken. It is something better, something eternal, something only He could give. You will not be who you were, And that is the miracle.